there's something inherently unsettling about gas stations on remote highways. Maybe it's the isolation, the flickering lights, or the eerie stillness that hangs in the air as you pull in late at night. These places, tucked away from the busy cities and crowded roads, seem to exist in their own realm, where time moves slower, and the rules of reality feel blurred. I've been on the road a lot in my life, and over the years, I've had my fair share of strange encounters at these roadside stations. Some of them left me feeling uneasy for days, others, well, they're the kind of experiences that make you question what you really saw, or if you were ever truly alone. These stories aren't about ghosts or monsters lurking in the dark, but rather the creeping sensation that something is just off. You pull up for a quick stop, thinking it's just another ordinary night, but sometimes, that's when the most unexpected and unsettling things happen. Here are a few of those experiences, each one leaving me with a lingering question: what exactly is hiding in the shadows of those lonely gas stations? One time, during a road trip through a deserted highway, I ended up stopping at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those forgotten roadside stations, barely any movement, dim lights, and a small convenience store that looked run down. It was late at night, around 11 p.m., and I was running low on gas. As I pulled into the station, I noticed there wasn't a single car or person around. The place had an eerie stillness to it, the kind that makes you second-guess if you should even be there. The station itself seemed old, like it hadn't been updated in decades, and the lights above the gas pumps flickered intermittently. I got out of the car, grabbed the pump, and started fueling up. That's when I noticed something strange. At first, it was just a feeling. You know when you can sense someone's eyes on you, even though you can't see them? I looked around, but there was no one, just the empty road and the dark outlines of trees off in the distance. The silence was thick, the only sound being the faint hum of the gas pump. Then, I glanced toward the convenience store. There, through the dirty windows, I could see the silhouette of someone standing at the counter. It startled me, because I hadn't seen anyone when I first arrived. The figure was motionless, and from the angle I was at, I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I told myself it was just an employee, maybe coming out from the back room. Still, something about it felt off. After the tank was full, I decided to head into the store to pay, even though it seemed deserted. As I opened the door, a little bell jingled above, echoing unnervingly through the empty aisles. The store had a musty smell, like it hadn't been aired out in years. My footsteps felt too loud, as if they were being amplified in the eerie quiet. I walked up to the counter, and that's when I noticed the person I had seen earlier was gone. The store was empty. The counter was old, dust covering the surface, and a small fan creaked as it spun lazily overhead. I called out, "Hello," but there was no response. Feeling uneasy, I looked around. The shelves were sparsely stocked, with expired snacks and a few dusty items. There was a door behind the counter, slightly ajar, leading to what I assumed was the back office. I thought maybe the employee had gone back there, so I called out again, a little louder this time, but still nothing. A strange feeling of dread started to creep over me, and I decided to leave. I went back to my car, feeling watched the entire time, though I couldn't see anyone. As I got in, I glanced back toward the store one last time, and I froze. Standing in the doorway, half hidden by the shadows, was that same figure I had seen earlier. But now, I could see their face. It was pale, with wide, unblinking eyes that stared directly at me. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. I felt an overwhelming sense of panic, slammed the car into gear, and sped out of there as fast as I could. As I drove away, my heart racing, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure following me down the dark highway. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind me. To this day, I have no idea who, or what, I saw at that gas station. I never went back, and every time I pass by a lonely gas station on a dark road, I get that same uneasy feeling, wondering if there's something or someone lurking just out of sight, waiting. Second story now. It was a few months after that first experience at the gas station. I was on another late-night drive, this time through a different stretch of road. It was one of those long highways where you don't see much for miles except the occasional truck or gas station. I hadn't thought much about what had happened before, but I was definitely more cautious about where I stopped. I remember it was around midnight when I noticed I was low on gas again. It was one of those situations where you think you'll make it to the next town, but the needle keeps dropping faster than you expect. So, I pulled off at the next gas station I saw, and to my surprise, it felt eerily familiar. The same kind of worn-down building, flickering lights, and barely any cars around, just like before. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was a car parked by one of the pumps, an old, beat-up sedan. The kind you see on the road and wonder how it's still running. As I pulled in, I noticed a guy standing by the sedan, his back turned to me. He was wearing a dirty flannel shirt, and his hair was long and messy. Something about him didn't feel right, but I didn't have much of a choice. I needed gas. I parked at the pump next to him, trying not to make eye contact, and started fueling up. The whole time, I could feel this tension in the air, like something was about to happen. The guy hadn't moved since I arrived, just standing there, facing away from me. The gas station itself looked deserted, no attendant in sight, and the only light came from the dim bulbs overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I finished fueling up quickly, eager to get out of there, but as I was putting the pump back, I heard it, a low, raspy voice. "Need any help?" It was the guy by the sedan. He hadn't turned around yet, but now he was speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. Something in my gut told me to just get in the car and leave, but I didn't want to be rude, so I replied, "No, I'm good, thanks." He didn't say anything after that. He just stood there, still facing away from me, his hand resting on his car's gas pump like he wasn't even using it. The whole situation felt wrong. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. I could feel my heart starting to race, but I tried to stay calm. I walked back to my car, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. When I reached for the door handle, I glanced at the convenience store, hoping to see someone inside, but the windows were dark. It looked like it was closed, even though the lights outside were on. As I opened the door to get in, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming toward me. I looked back, and the guy was finally turning around. His face was pale, almost sickly looking, with deep-set eyes that didn't blink. His expression was blank, like he wasn't fully there. "Are you sure you don't need help?" he asked again, this time louder, but with the same unsettling rasp in his voice. My instincts kicked in. I jumped into the car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. As I fumbled to get the keys into the ignition, I saw him walking toward my car, slowly at first, then faster. His expression never changed, but his movements became more urgent, almost frantic. I started the car, backed out of the space as fast as I could, and sped off down the highway. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me as I drove away. His figure grew smaller in the distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with him, like he wasn't just some random guy at a gas station. For the next few miles, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see his car behind me. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road ahead and the faint outline of the gas station disappearing into the night. I don't know what his deal was, and frankly, I don't want to know. But ever since that night, I make sure to never stop at gas stations in the middle of nowhere after dark. There's something about those places that feels off, like they're stuck in time, waiting for something or someone who isn't quite right. Third story. It happened about a year after my second strange encounter at a gas station. By then, I had convinced myself that maybe those experiences were just bad luck or that I had let my imagination get the best of me. But this third time, something happened that I still can't fully explain. I was on a long road trip, traveling through some rural backroads. It was the kind of trip where I didn't have a set schedule, just driving to clear my head and enjoy the solitude. It was late afternoon, and I noticed my gas gauge was getting low, so I decided to stop at the next station I saw. About 20 minutes later, I came across a small, isolated gas station, tucked away off the main road. It looked like one of those old, family-owned places, with a single pump and a tiny building. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the station, and the whole place looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. But I didn't have many options, so I pulled in. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed something strange right away. There were no other cars around, not even behind the building or off to the side. The place felt abandoned, but the lights above the pump were still on, flickering slightly in the dusk. I started fueling up, but something about the air felt thick, almost suffocating. It was dead quiet, no sounds of insects, no wind, nothing. Just the dull hum of the gas pump. That's when I saw a figure out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was someone coming out of the small convenience store. It was a man, dressed in old, dirty clothes, standing just outside the door, leaning against the wall. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking down at the ground, almost like he was lost in thought. But the odd thing was, his posture didn't change. He didn't move, not even a twitch. I finished pumping the gas and, feeling a little uneasy, decided to go inside to pay. The store looked as rundown as the rest of the station, with windows so dirty it was hard to see inside. As I approached the door, I glanced at the man again. He still hadn't moved, not an inch. His face was hidden under the brim of a dirty cap, and something about him made my skin crawl. I hesitated for a second, then walked into the store. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the air inside was stale, like it hadn't been ventilated in years. There was no one behind the counter, and the shelves were half empty, stocked with old, expired products. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But there was no answer. I walked up to the counter, hoping someone would come out from the back, but the place was completely silent. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound of footsteps, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around, expecting to see the man who had been outside, but the store was empty. The front door was still closed, and the windows didn't show anyone near the pumps. My heart started to race. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then, the sound came again. This time, it was louder, like someone walking slowly across the floor behind the counter. But no one was there. I could feel my pulse quicken, and every instinct told me to get out of there. As I turned to leave, I saw something that stopped me cold. In the corner of the store, by the window, was a small, dusty mirror. Reflected in it was the figure of the man from outside. But this time, he was standing inside the store, just a few feet behind me, his head still bowed, his body motionless. I spun around, but there was no one there. The store was empty, just as it had been when I walked in. But when I looked back at the mirror, the man was still there, closer now, his face still hidden beneath that cap. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest, and ran straight to my car. I didn't even bother locking the door, I just threw it into gear and peeled out of that gas station as fast as I could. As I sped down the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The gas station was fading into the distance, but I could swear I saw that same man, standing at the edge of the road, watching me drive away. I don't know what I experienced that day, and I haven't stopped at any roadside gas stations since. There's something about those places that feels like they exist in their own world, separate from everything else. And whatever's there, well, I don't plan on finding out again. Conclusion. After all these experiences, one thing has become clear to me: gas stations on deserted highways are not just ordinary stops for refueling. There's something about these places that taps into our deepest instincts, something you can't quite see but can definitely feel in the air, in that eerie stillness that seems to hang over everything. I can't fully explain what happened in each of these situations, but the discomfort and the feeling of being watched never completely went away. Maybe it's all just coincidence. Maybe these are just places forgotten by time, where the darkness of night and the isolation of the road play tricks on our minds. But even so, after everything I've experienced, I've learned to avoid stopping at places like this, especially at night. Because, in the end, some questions are better left unanswered.